Hey guys, tonight we slip through the shadowed gates of a palace where moonlight gleams on polished limestone, and the air smells faintly of lotus and warm honeyed wine. You hear the hush of the Nile somewhere beyond, but here in the inner courtyard, every sound is padded, private, almost conspiratorial. Torches burn low, the walls are high enough to block out the wind, the city noise, and most importantly, any prying eyes. You probably wouldn't survive this place, not because anyone here would harm you outright, but because the constant swirl of wine, whispered invitations, and indulgence might smother your sense of time until morning and night blur into one endless, decadent haze. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me your location and your local time in the comments, because I love picturing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move through a columned hall where polished floors reflect the flicker of oil lamps. Every column is painted with scenes of gods who themselves are no strangers to sensuality. Hathor, goddess of love, leaning toward Horus in an embrace that the priests pretend is purely symbolic. Above you, a painted ceiling glitters with tiny flecks of gold leaf, designed to catch lamplight and mimic the stars. The palace smells like cinnamon, frankincense, and something headier, possibly blue lotus resin, the kind they steep into wine for its dreamy, slightly intoxicating effect. This is no cold political chamber. It's a house built to keep a human at the very height of pleasure. The floor cushions are thick enough that you sink into them like a boat into calm water. Even the air is warm, trapped by heavy linen curtains that sway with the movements of attendants carrying trays of pomegranates and honey cakes. One historical record tells us that the Pharaoh's palace in Memphis contained a private garden stocked with exotic flowers and birds imported from Nubia, not for any agricultural purpose but simply to create the right mood for an evening stroll. At the center of the room, a low platform is strewn with shimmering fabrics, silks from distant lands, linen so finely woven it feels like breath on your skin. This is where the pharaoh would lounge, surrounded not only by advisors and scribes, but by a rotating constellation of favored companions. It's easy to imagine a scene, a harpist plucking slow, hypnotic chords while a dancer moves, each step perfectly in time with the music, her anklets chiming softly. There's a fringe story, more whispered than proven, that some pharaohs kept pleasure rooms within the palace, decorated entirely with scenes of amorous myths, stocked with jars of scented oil, and accessible only to a chosen few. Historians still argue whether such rooms were fact or the exaggerated rumor of foreign visitors trying to scandalize their audiences back home. Still, walking these halls, it's hard not to believe every lavish rumor you've ever heard. The strangest part? None of this was seen as shameful. In a land where rulers were considered living gods, physical pleasure was simply another divine right, like commanding armies or ordering monuments to be built in your honor. Even the religious calendar wove moments of sensuality into its festivals. You can almost hear the echo of festival nights in the courtyards, where dancers and priests alike would act out the sacred union of gods, the line between devotion and desire blurring in the firelight. And yet, beneath all this opulence, there's a constant hum of calculation. Every invitation to join the pharaoh at the evening's gathering is a test, every shared cup of wine a negotiation. You notice how even laughter is measured, eyes darting to see who's watching. Because in this palace, intimacy is never free, it's currency. To be close to the pharaoh is to gain access to favors, influence, maybe even survival. Lose that closeness, and you might find yourself reassigned to a far-off temple in the desert, where the only sound at night is the hiss of sand. You pass an alcove where a carved relief shows the pharaoh with an arm draped around a companion's shoulders. The figure's identity is deliberately vague. Scholars debate whether it's a favored wife, a sibling, or a foreign dignitary. The sculptor left the features just generic enough to keep the official record spotless, but the intimacy of the pose says otherwise. This was not a ruler afraid to be seen enjoying another's closeness. One attendant offers you a drink, a clear, slightly golden liquid in a delicate alabaster cup. It's sweet, spiced, and warm, and halfway through you feel the faintest melting sensation behind your eyes. You wonder how many of these drinks it would take to lose all sense of time, to forget whether you're in the mortal world or floating somewhere just outside it. Somewhere deeper in the palace, the night is still building. Soft drums begin to pulse, joined by flutes and the low hum of voices warming up to song. You catch glimpses of embroidered belts, glittering pectorals, and bare shoulders dusted with gold powder. Here, beauty is a weapon as sharp as any blade. It's on display for the pharaoh, yes, but also for each other. Everyone playing a game of attraction and status that could tip the balance of power by morning. The longer you stand in this glow, the more you feel its pull. Your steps slow. The edges of the room blur. A storyteller in the corner begins reciting an old tale of Hathor luring the sun god Ra into a night of music and wine so that the Nile might rise in abundance. People smile knowingly at the verses, savoring the double meanings. If you listen closely, you can hear the Nile again, beyond the palace walls, steady, dark, eternal. But in here, the river might as well not exist. The palace has its own current, one made of silk and music and the endless need to feel, taste, and be admired. And you realize, whether the historians exaggerate or not, this palace of pleasure could swallow whole not just nights, but entire reigns. You drift farther into the labyrinth of corridors, where the air shifts from sweet incense to something heavier, musk, myrrh, and the faint tang of perfumed oil warmed by human skin. Here, the lighting grows softer, the torches replaced by bronze braziers, casting an amber glow. Shadows dance across painted walls, bending the figures of gods and mortals until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. A tall, silent guard lets you pass without a word. He wears a gold-collared necklace that tells you he's not here just for security. In this palace, even guards are chosen for their looks, their elegance, and perhaps their other talents. You notice his eyes follow you, not in suspicion, but with the kind of appraisal you might expect from a sculptor, considering how best to capture your form in stone. You step into what might be the most private chamber yet. At first glance, it looks like a library, scrolls stacked neatly in niches, the smell of papyrus mixing with the perfume in the air. But then you realize these are not just texts on farming or law. Some of the scrolls are illustrations, elegant and explicit, depicting scenes that would make a modern art museum blush. The pharaoh's scholars apparently kept detailed records of techniques, rituals, and pleasure philosophies imported from neighboring lands. Historians still argue whether these were meant as educational guides or just royal entertainment. In one corner, an attendant grinds something in a small alabaster mortar. The sound is rhythmic, almost hypnotic. She's preparing kaifi, a blend of honey, wine, raisins, cinnamon, and more than a dozen other ingredients. The priests burn it in temples, but here it's mixed into wine for an evening drink that can loosen the tongue and warm the body. You can smell it from across the room, sweet and smoky, with a bite that promises mischief. On a low table nearby are trays of food that look almost sculptural, figs split open to reveal their crimson interiors, dates stuffed with nuts, and flatbreads drizzled with honey. The way they're arranged, you can't help but think the meal is as much about appearance as taste, a display meant to draw the eye and spark the appetite, for more than just food. One fragmentary papyrus claims a pharaoh once insisted on eating from the skin of a favored consort, purely for the thrill of mixing sensation with indulgence. Was it true? No one can prove it. But you can see how easily rumor could bloom in a place like this. As you explore, you notice another room connected by an arched doorway. Here, the floor is covered in woven mats and piles of embroidered cushions. The ceiling is painted deep blue, scattered with gold stars, so it feels like lying under the night sky without ever leaving the safety of the palace. This, you realize, is where the pharaoh might retreat with select company, away from the public banquets, into a setting where conversation could drop to a whisper and touches could linger without the weight of ceremony. A harpist sits in the corner, plucking soft notes that hum in your chest. Across from her, a pair of dancers move in perfect harmony, their steps slow and deliberate. Their bodies are oiled, catching the light, every motion an invitation, They wear little more than beaded belts and gold necklaces, and yet there's nothing crude about it. It's ritual, art, and seduction all at once. In Egypt, beauty wasn't just admired, it was weaponized. You pass a niche where small alabaster jars are lined up like soldiers. Each is labeled in hieratic script, describing oils scented with lotus, sandalwood, cinnamon, or even imported myrrh from Punt. The labels suggest specific uses: to calm the mind, to arouse desire, to heighten sensation. One quirky tidbit: some recipes included crushed malachite, supposedly to invite divine visions. Whether those visions were religious or purely sensory, well, historians still argue. You find yourself standing before a polished copper mirror, taller than you, framed in ebony and gold. Your reflection shimmers in the firelight, distorted just enough to make you wonder if this is how the pharaoh saw himself: larger, softer around the edges, bathed in gold. Attendants used these mirrors not just for grooming, but to create moments of shared vanity, the kind that could dissolve the distance between ruler and companion. Somewhere behind you, laughter erupts, low and genuine. You glance back to see the pharaoh himself, or herself, depending on which reign you imagine, lounging on a couch, draped in linen so fine it's practically invisible. Jewelry catches the light at every movement. The ruler's gaze flickers between guests, measuring, assessing, deciding who will be invited deeper into the night's unfolding game. The thing about pleasure in this palace is that it's never random. Every look, every shared cup, every slow step in a dance is calculated. You can almost see the invisible strings connecting people here. Pull one, and alliances shift. Pull another, and a rival might suddenly find themselves banished to a temple in the desert. As the music changes, the air grows warmer, the scents more potent. You feel your own pulse slow, your senses sharpen. It's easy to see how someone could lose days here, wrapped in silk, drunk on wine and glances. The outside world, the taxes, the armies, the politics, feels like it belongs to another lifetime. In this place, there's only the present moment, stretched thin like gold leaf over the contours of the night. And somewhere, just beyond the soft music, you hear the Nile again, a reminder that even the most private pleasures are bound to the rhythm of the land, that every indulgence is fed by the same river that sustains the kingdom. But here in this room scented with lotus and honey, the river might as well be a dream. The scene shifts as you follow a narrow hallway lit by tall oil lamps, their flames bending in the faint draft. You step past painted scenes of gods with animal heads: Anubis, Hathor, Thoth, standing beside human lovers in poses that leave almost nothing to the imagination. These aren't the stiff, formal murals you'd expect from a history textbook. They're fluid, alive, dripping with the suggestion that desire itself was divine. The ancient Egyptians didn't hide their sensuality behind closed doors. It was woven right into their spirituality. You arrive at a domed chamber that feels entirely different from the others. The ceiling is painted like a sunrise, streaked with gold leaf that catches the firelight so convincingly you almost expect the room to grow warmer as you look up. Around the edges of the space are carved alcoves, each containing a low bed covered in fine linen dyed with rare pigments: deep indigo, soft carmine, shimmering ochre. At the center is a large, raised platform, surrounded by tall alabaster vases filled with blue lotus flowers. A curious fact: the blue lotus wasn't just a decorative flourish. It acted as a mild intoxicant and aphrodisiac when steeped in wine. Guests here would sip from carved cups, the sweet floral taste sliding into their bloodstream, loosening their bodies, clouding their worries. Historians still argue whether the flower's effects were purely chemical or if part of the intoxication came from the ritual itself: the lighting, the music, the shared act of indulgence. From the corner of the room, you hear the faint sound of a sistrum, a rattle-like instrument sacred to Hathor, goddess of love, music, and joy. A woman in sheer linen sways as she plays, her gold earrings flashing like sparks. She doesn't look at you directly, but you can feel her awareness in every movement, as if she knows exactly how her presence shifts the air. Near the platform, a small group of attendants work with the precision of jewelers. They mix powders of ground alabaster and crushed rose petals into a paste, which they apply to the pharaoh's skin for softness and fragrance. In another corner, a servant slowly braids strands of gold into someone's hair, turning each twist into a thin, glittering rope. One quirky tidbit. The ancient Egyptians valued body hair so little in these circles that both men and women often had themselves fully shaved before an evening like this. Clean skin was considered a mark of refinement, and wigs or headdresses were layered on afterward for effect. As you take in the details, you realize there's a deliberate rhythm to the night. It's not a wild, chaotic feast. Everything is paced like a ceremony. The music swells, then quiets. The lighting shifts as fresh lamps are lit. Trays of figs and pomegranate seeds appear, followed by goblets of spiced wine. You start to understand that this isn't just about indulgence, it's about control. The Pharaoh decides the tempo, the order, the flavor of every moment. There's a corner draped with gauzy linen curtains, and curiosity gets the better of you. Inside is a space barely large enough for two people, the air warm with the scent of cinnamon oil. Cushions line the floor, and a polished ivory box sits open, revealing rings, necklaces, and amulets, not for public display, but for private play. Some are carved in shapes that make you glance away for a heartbeat before you remember where you are. Historians still argue whether such objects were purely symbolic or functional, but you suspect no one here asked too many questions. Outside the curtain, a ripple of laughter spreads through the guests. You glance over to see a young nobleman balancing a shallow cup of wine on the back of his hand while dancing, the liquid trembling but never spilling. The Pharaoh claps slowly, a smile playing at the corners of their mouth. Approval here is currency. You can almost feel the man's status rise with every beat. You move again, circling the central platform. The blue lotus scent is stronger here, mixing with the warmth of bodies and the tang of wine. It's intoxicating in a way that has nothing to do with intoxication. You feel suspended between waking and dreaming. Somewhere deep in your mind, a little voice reminds you that all of this opulence exists on the back of laborers in the sun, soldiers on the borders, and farmers keeping the Nile-fed fields alive. But in this chamber, that reality is as distant as the desert horizon. One of the attendants offers you a small golden cup. The drink is thick and sweet, almost like honey mixed with herbs. It leaves a faint, tingling aftertaste, and you wonder if it's the same Pharaoh's cordial mentioned in certain scrolls, said to keep the body warm even in the chill of night. Was that warmth physical, or something else entirely? Historians still argue. The music shifts again, this time to a low, pulsing rhythm you feel more than hear. Two dancers move on to the central platform, their steps perfectly mirrored. They wear elaborate collars of turquoise and gold, and their movements echo the cycles of the Nile, rising, falling, flowing into each other. The audience watches in perfect silence, every eye fixed on the shifting shapes their bodies make. It's not just performance, it's a language, one the Pharaoh alone can truly interpret. As the dance ends, the guests slowly begin to drift into smaller groups, conversations bubbling up in corners. The air is thick with the unspoken, alliances forming, rivalries cooling, secrets traded in exchange for a brush of the hand. Here, desire and diplomacy are two threads of the same tapestry. And as you step back toward the edge of the room, you realize you're still caught in it, unable to tell where the ritual ends and the seduction begins. You slip out of the lotus-scented chamber and into a long colonnade that opens onto a courtyard bathed in the pale glow of moonlight. The sudden cool air brushes against your skin like a whisper after the dense, perfumed heat inside. Columns painted in vivid reds and greens rise around you, their capitals shaped like papyrus blossoms. But your attention is drawn to the far side of the courtyard, where torchlight flickers over something you weren't expecting. Rows of low marble tubs, steam curling from their surfaces like miniature clouds. This is no simple bathhouse. It's the Pharaoh's private house of cleansing, a place where purity is equal parts physical ritual and psychological theater. Servants in crisp linen tunics move in quiet coordination, pouring jugs of warm water infused with crushed mint, fenugreek, and even powdered malachite. Yes, the same mineral used for eye paint, into the baths. The belief was that bathing in these mineral mixtures could ward off evil spirits, enhance beauty, and, oddly enough, improve fertility. Historians still argue whether these ingredients did anything beyond smelling nice, but in a place like this, perception was often more important than proof. You notice that the baths aren't hidden away. They're fully visible from the shaded peristyle walkway that surrounds the courtyard. Here, modesty is a foreign concept. Bathing is performance, skin glistening in firelight, bodies framed by carved stone, laughter carrying over the sound of splashing water. The Pharaoh strolls among the tubs like a conductor overseeing an orchestra, pausing now and then to murmur something to a guest, their words lost in the steam. At the far edge of the courtyard, you spot something stranger, a smaller pool lined not with marble, but with polished obsidian. The water inside glimmers like liquid night. Two attendants stand beside it holding bronze bowls filled with what looks like powdered gold. They scatter it across the surface in slow, deliberate arcs, and the metal dust floats for a moment before sinking. A quirky tidbit. Egyptians believed gold wasn't just valuable, it was incorruptible, eternal, the very flesh of the gods. Immersing yourself in gold-infused water wasn't about luxury, it was about stealing a little divine permanence for yourself. From somewhere behind you, music drifts into the courtyard. Not the languid rhythms of the last chamber, but something sharper, hand drums and the plucking of a harp. The change pulls your attention toward an open side passage lit by more torches. Curiosity tugs at you, and before you know it, you're slipping inside. The passage leads to a smaller, oval-shaped room with a sunken center. Guests recline on cushioned benches arranged in tiers, watching the spectacle below. In the pit, three masked performers move in hypnotic circles. Their masks, carved wood painted with wide, staring eyes, are unnerving in the dim light. You can't tell who's under them, and maybe that's the point. The anonymity makes the performance feel dangerous, like something that should be kept secret but isn't. One performer kneels, unrolling a scroll painted with strange, looping hieroglyphs you can't read. They chant softly, their voice echoing off the stone. Another begins to dance, not graceful, but jerking, almost frantic, as if possessed. The third circles them both, sprinkling what smells like frankincense onto a small brazier until the air grows thick with smoke. This isn't for entertainment, it feels older, darker, like you've stepped into the bones of a ritual the palace keeps buried under silk and gold. Historians still argue whether these underground ceremonies were sanctioned magic or dangerous heresy that somehow survived in plain sight. Someone beside you leans in just close enough to whisper, "That one there, a priest's son, shouldn't even be here." Then they lean back, grinning like they've just handed you a spark and are waiting for the fire. You tear your eyes from the scene and climb back toward the doorway. The corridor beyond smells faintly of cedarwood and something sharper, metallic. It leads into yet another chamber, smaller, but crowded with shelves holding glass jars, clay pots, and woven baskets. This is the Pharaoh's essence room, where perfumes, oils, and unguents are mixed to suit the mood of an evening. A perfumer works at a low table, grinding something in a bronze mortar. The rhythmic scrape is soothing, but you also notice the casual precision with which they handle ingredients. Some jars are marked with red glyphs, a warning that their contents are potent enough to sicken, sedate, or perhaps persuade. A single mainstream fact slips into your mind. Perfume making in ancient Egypt wasn't just an art, it was considered a branch of medicine and even religion. The right blend could please the gods, charm a lover, or poison an enemy. And here, with so many scents swirling together, you can't tell which jars belong to which purpose. When you step back into the courtyard, the baths are still alive with movement, steam curling upward into the moonlight. But now something feels different. Maybe it's the gold water, or the masked dancers still lingering in your mind, or the faint knowledge that everything here, every flower petal, every droplet of oil, exists because the Pharaoh wills it so. And in this palace, the Pharaoh's will is law, desire, and danger, all braided into one. You wander deeper into the palace, passing through an arched doorway where the air feels heavier, warmer, as if the very walls are breathing. The flicker of oil lamps paints slow-moving shadows across the limestone, and you notice that the ceiling here is lower, the space intentionally intimate. The floor is covered in woven reed mats, but not the simple ones used by commoners. These are dyed in deep blues and ochres, each strand glistening faintly with what might be beeswax to keep them supple. In the center of the room sits a low dais draped in leopard skins, real ones, their spots faded but their texture unmistakable under the touch. This is the Pharaoh's judgment seat, though tonight it's not used for trials or decrees. No, this seat doubles as a stage for something stranger, the public weighing of personal worth. One by one, favored guests approach the dais, not to bow or kneel, but to present an offering of themselves. It might be a song, a poem, a crafted trinket, or, more daring, a confession whispered directly to the ruler. The pharaoh watches each with a calm face, his hands resting on the carved arms of the seat, but you can feel the undercurrent of power here. Approval could mean rising in the court's social ranks. Displeasure could mean you'll spend the next few months posted at some mosquito-infested outpost along the Nile. The mainstream historical fact: pharaohs often blended governance with performance, blurring the line between court ceremony and political theater. But here, the performance is deeply personal. One young man steps forward with a small bronze mirror, its polished surface catching the firelight. He says it belonged to his mother, a palace servant, and that her dying wish was for it to return to the royal household. The pharaoh tilts his head, takes the mirror, and hands it to an attendant without a word. Approval, rejection. No one can tell. Off to the side, you overhear something more scandalous, a whispered bet between two courtiers about who will be bold enough to bring a forbidden gift. This is where the quirky tidbit comes in. Ancient Egyptians had taboos around certain animals, but also strange fixations on others. In some regions, offering a live ibis was considered sacred. In others, it was a deliberate insult. The bet centers on whether anyone will dare present the ruler with a live, hissing cobra tonight. The murmur in the room shifts when a woman in a long, semi-transparent linen dress steps forward. She holds no gift, only her gaze, locked unflinchingly on the pharaoh. The silence stretches so long you can hear the hiss of an oil lamp. Then she speaks, not in the formal flowing court dialect, but in the rougher accent of the Delta marshlands. You don't catch every word, but the tone is unmistakable, a challenge, a reminder that the ruler's power is only as strong as the people's belief in it. Historians still argue whether such public challenges were staged or spontaneous, but either way, the room hums with tension. The pharaoh smiles, slowly, like a crocodile basking before a lunge, and beckons her closer. She ascends the dais and kneels at his feet. He places a hand on her shoulder, leans down, and whispers something that makes her laugh, a short, surprised sound. Then, with a small wave, he sends her back into the crowd. Just like that, the moment passes and the audience exhales as if they've been holding their breath. You slip toward the far wall, where an open archway leads into a narrow corridor. The air is cooler here, tinged with a faint metallic scent. Small niches in the walls hold clay jars sealed with wax. Some are labeled with neat hieroglyphs. Others bear only a single painted symbol. A palace attendant passes you, carrying one such jar wrapped in linen. You can't help but ask what's inside. They smirk and say, "Moonlight." Then they're gone before you can press for an explanation. You're left wondering if that's a code for something, or if in this palace moonlight can be bottled. The corridor ends in a round chamber with an open skylight, the night sky perfectly framed above. In the center sits a shallow stone basin filled not with water, but with fine desert sand. Every so often, a servant walks around the basin, dragging a forked stick through the sand to create intricate patterns that look like ripples in water. You realize this is another form of offering, a meditative act meant to please the gods by imitating the flow of the Nile. The patterns will be smoothed away by morning, but for now they feel strangely alive. As you watch, the faint thump of drums echoes from somewhere beyond. The beat is slow, deliberate, and it draws you toward a side passage half hidden behind a curtain of woven reeds. You push through, and suddenly you're in a space lit only by a handful of lamps set on the floor, their flames dancing low. Here, there are no grand displays, no leopard skins or gold, just people, some reclining, some kneeling, engaged in quiet, intense conversations. This is the Whisper Hall, where alliances are forged, debts are called in, and truths are traded like currency. You catch fragments of talk, a promise of land in exchange for loyalty, a warning about a planned inspection of the granaries, a name spoken with just enough venom to mark it for ruin. You realize something. In a palace this ornate, the real power moves not in the bright halls of ceremony, but here, in the dim corners where the walls lean close to listen. The Whisper Hall fades behind you as you follow that slow drumbeat deeper into the palace. The rhythm seems to pulse in your chest, steady and hypnotic, until you step into a long, low chamber lined with towering reed screens. The air smells of honeyed wine and something else, sweet, but with a faintly sour edge like fruit that's been left just long enough to start fermenting. Low couches are scattered in loose clusters, each piled with linen cushions and draped with colorful throws. On some, small groups recline together, sipping from shared bowls. On others, individuals sit cross-legged, eyes half-lidded, as if trying to hold on to a dream. And everywhere, attendants glide silently, refilling cups and offering trays of figs, dates, and slices of roasted goose. This is not a banquet in the public sense. This is the Pharaoh's private night court, a space reserved for the innermost circle. Here, hierarchy blurs. A general might sit shoulder to shoulder with a temple singer, a wealthy merchant might find themselves laughing beside a priest. The Pharaoh himself is not yet in sight, but his presence is felt. Every voice here is pitched just low enough to suggest he could be listening. Mainstream historical fact: private feasts like this often featured entertainment that went well beyond music or dance. Skilled performers might act out bawdy folk tales, some of which survive in fragments on papyrus. Tonight the entertainment is subtler, a group of masked figures weaving between the couches, their steps perfectly in time with the drumbeat. Each mask is different: falcon, jackal, lotus blossom, scarab. You realize they're not just moving randomly, they're approaching guests in a specific order, whispering into their ears, then moving on. One masked dancer kneels beside you, the falcon. They tilt their head as if studying you, then whisper a single word: Hedget, the white crown. You have no idea what to do with that, but you nod, trying to look as if you understand. The dancer's shoulders shake slightly, maybe a laugh, before they glide away. The quirky tidbit here: ancient Egyptians sometimes used party games with layered meanings, mixing flirtation, political signaling, and outright dares. One such game involved passing secret phrases from person to person, the meaning of which might only become clear hours, or even days, later. You suspect you've just been pulled into one. A hush rolls through the chamber as the Pharaoh finally arrives, not through the main archway, but from a side entrance, barefoot, wearing a simple white kilt and a collar of turquoise beads. There is no fanfare, no trumpets, just his slow, deliberate walk to the central couch. He sits, cross-legged, and begins to peel a fig with his fingers. It's a strangely intimate act, one that somehow commands more attention than a throne entrance ever could. One guest, emboldened, asks if the ruler will join the drinking game tonight. The Pharaoh smiles faintly and agrees. Historians still argue whether these games were genuine tests of endurance or elaborate performances designed to display control. Either way, servants bring out shallow bowls of wine mixed with herbs, stronger than what's served to anyone else. The rules are simple: drink when the Pharaoh drinks, match him cup for cup. The first to falter must answer a question, truthfully, and in front of everyone. You take a cautious sip, tasting sweetness, then a creeping bitterness that lingers at the back of your throat. 3 rounds in, the first casualty comes, a broad-shouldered man in a gold armband who sways, then admits to borrowing one of the palace's ivory combs for his wife. The room laughs, but there's an edge to it. The Pharaoh simply nods and moves on. Between rounds, the masked dancers return, this time removing their masks and revealing familiar faces: a priestess, a scribe, even one of the royal guards. It's as if the masks were just another layer of court intrigue. One moment, they're performers. The next, they're back to their official roles. You wonder how many other parts of this night are staged. Across the room you catch sight of something unusual, a small, low table covered entirely with tiny clay figurines. Each one is painted in bright colors, red, blue, green, and shaped like an animal, plant, or symbol. Guests approach in ones and twos, selecting a figure, holding it for a moment, then placing it back. You're told it's a game of divination. You choose a figure, and the pharaoh will later decide if it's a sign of fortune or warning. You pick one shaped like a lotus flower. The attendant who sees your choice smiles but doesn't explain. As the night deepens, the air grows warmer, the conversation's more fragmented, and the drumbeat slows. The pharaoh leans back, half in shadow, eyes scanning the room as if watching his own dream play out. You can't shake the feeling that everything here, the drinks, the dancers, even your lotus figurine, is part of a larger pattern you're not meant to fully understand. Just before you leave, a masked dancer, now wearing the scarab, brushes past you and murmurs, "Hedjet, lotus, remember," and then they're gone into the crowd. The night court dissolves into a blur of lamplight and murmurs as you step back into the cooler corridor, your mind carrying the strange weight of those two words. The corridor twists left, then right, narrowing until your shoulders nearly brush the walls. The torches here burn lower, their light flickering over faded murals of crocodiles leaping from papyrus thickets. You catch the faint sound of running water ahead, a cool promise in the stifling air. You step through a beaded curtain and find yourself in a long, shallow hall where the floor itself seems alive. Water flows in narrow channels cut into polished limestone, looping and intersecting like an elaborate maze. The channels are filled with lotus blossoms, their petals just beginning to close in the dimness, and the air is thick with their heady, almost narcotic scent. This is the fragrance court, a place whispered about even by those who have never been allowed inside. Here, the pharaoh's inner circle experiments with scents the way others might with music or poetry, layering resins, oils, and crushed petals to create moods, sway opinions, or, some say, provoke more intimate reactions. Mainstream historical fact: perfumes in ancient Egypt were not just cosmetic. They had ritual uses, medicinal claims, and even legal importance. Certain temple perfumes were considered so sacred that possessing them without permission could result in severe punishment. You're handed a small clay cup, the surface still warm from a hand's touch. Inside is a thick, amber-colored oil. The attendant instructs you to rub it between your palms and inhale. You obey, and the scent blooms. Sweet myrrh at first, then a sharper undertone of blue lotus, and finally something darker, musky, almost animal. Quirky tidbit: the ancient Egyptians sometimes used perfumes infused with ingredients like fermented ostrich eggs or crushed turtle shell, not because they smelled pleasant, but because they were believed to amplify certain traits in the wearer, from confidence to fertility. You try not to think about which category your current scent might belong to. A woman in a beaded wig approaches you, her eyes lined heavily in kohl. She holds a small tray of tiny glass vials, each sealed with beeswax. She gestures for you to pick one. You choose a vial filled with pale green liquid, and she nods approvingly, then leans in close to whisper, "It was favored by queens who got what they wanted." Historians still argue whether such favorite scents were really unique recipes or just marketing stories spun by palace perfumers. Either way, the suggestion plants itself in your mind. A commotion draws your attention to the far end of the hall, where a servant is pouring oil into a bronze brazier. The flames leap up, sending out a wave of fragrant smoke that curls through the air like silk. People gather around, closing their eyes, breathing deeply, almost swaying. You realize this isn't just for pleasure, it's a performance. The firelight paints their skin gold, the scent binds them in a shared, invisible net, and the whole moment feels choreographed to the heartbeat of the palace. You notice, too, that not all the scents here are pleasant. Near one corner, an open jar emits a sharp, vinegary tang that makes your eyes water. An older man dips a reed stick into it and brushes it along the inside of his wrists like a challenge. Later, you overhear someone say it's meant to ward off false friends. Whether it works or just clears a room, you're not sure. In a far alcove, a basin of water ripples gently, its surface floating with petals and flickering with lamplight. Guests lean over it, letting the vapor rise to their faces. When you try it, You feel the warmth prick your skin, carrying with it the mingled scents of frankincense and cinnamon. For a moment your thoughts scatter, like the petals drifting on the water's surface. Then from behind you a familiar voice, soft, amused, says, "Hedjet, lotus, now cedar." You turn, but the speaker is gone, swallowed into the perfumed haze. The attendants begin extinguishing lamps one by one, the darkness pushing you gently toward an arched doorway at the far side. The scent clings to your skin, your hair, your thoughts, so that even as you step back into the cooler hallways beyond, you can't tell if you're still breathing the fragrance or just remembering it. The arched doorway opens into an expanse of light and sound that makes you pause. You've stepped into a courtyard so wide that the far colonnades shimmer in the midday heat. The marble floor is patterned in alternating bands of white and deep red stone, and everywhere there's movement. Musicians, priests, acrobats, guards, and clusters of ordinary citizens craning their necks to glimpse you. This is not just a courtyard. This is a stage. You quickly realize that every single eye here expects you to play a part, and not just any part. The God King. The gold pectoral hanging from your neck catches the sun and throws it back at them, dazzling enough to make a few people shield their eyes. They don't see the sweat at your temples or the slight ache in your calves from hours of standing. They see divinity wrapped in linen. Mainstream historical fact. Pharaohs were considered both political rulers and incarnations of gods on earth, specifically the falcon-headed Horus in life and Osiris in death. Every public appearance reinforced this identity, and breaking that illusion could undermine the entire state. A group of children are brought forward, each holding an offering, fresh figs, a folded papyrus scroll, a small ibis figurine. You accept them with the slow, deliberate grace drilled into you since childhood. A wrong gesture here could be interpreted as bad omen for the harvest. Somewhere behind you, a scribe mutters the order of events under his breath. First, the sun salutation. Then the blessing of the Nile. Then the ritual dance with the priestesses of Hathor. Yes, that dance. The one where your movements are supposed to mirror the birth of the cosmos. You remember the steps, but you also remember the priestess from last season who accidentally leaned too close, her breath warm on your neck, drawing audible gasps from the crowd. Historians still argue whether moments like that were spontaneous or choreographed to keep public interest high. Quirky tidbit. Some temple festivals were essentially massive ancient block parties, with beer brewed specifically for the occasion, and dancers who combined religious symbolism with moves that might make a modern club DJ blush. The line between sacred and suggestive could be surprisingly thin under the desert sun. The drums begin. Low at first, like the sound of distant thunder, then faster, the beat rolling through your chest. The priestesses emerge from behind a veil of incense smoke, their gold belts jingling faintly as they take their positions around you. The scent of blue lotus rises again, fainter than in the fragrance court, but unmistakable. You lift your arms to the sky. The crowd goes silent. In the stillness, you can hear the flap of ibis wings from the rooftop. Then, with a sharp downstroke of your arms, the dance begins. You move in perfect rhythm, your linen kilt swaying, the gold amulets at your waist chiming in counterpoint to the drums. Someone in the crowd shouts a blessing. Another breaks into tears. You are both human and something more than human here. Every step you take is myth in motion. But between beats, you catch sight of a hooded figure lingering at the edge of the courtyard, face shadowed. For a heartbeat, the mask slips. You feel exposed, vulnerable. Assassins have struck at public events before, hidden in plain sight. The thought flashes through your mind like a blade, but you keep moving. By the time the final drumbeat echoes against the colonnades, the hooded figure is gone. The crowd erupts in cheers, and attendants rush forward with towels soaked in rose water to wipe your face and hands. You let them fuss over you, nodding as if you've just returned from conversing with the gods themselves. From here, you're guided toward the temple steps for the Nile blessing. You take a ceremonial jar of water, pour it slowly into the river, and watch the ripples carry your reflection away. Somewhere downstream, fishermen will see this as a sign to begin the season's first catch. The sun blazes overhead, but your mind is still on the hooded figure, and the knowledge that tomorrow you'll have to do all this again. They say the mark of true power is never being alone, yet somehow that makes you the loneliest person in Egypt. You can't even walk from your bedchamber to the balcony without someone shadowing your steps. Today is no different. You wake to the rustle of linen curtains, and before you can open your eyes, two attendants are already fanning away the morning flies. One adjusts the angle of the fan so the breeze hits your face just right. The other holds a tray with figs and warm goat's milk. You don't remember asking for breakfast, but that's the point. They anticipate your whims before you speak. Mainstream historical fact. Pharaohs were surrounded at all times by attendants, guards, scribes, and specialized servants. Some handled grooming, some oversaw clothing changes, others managed the ceremonial items for public appearances. Privacy, as we know it today, was non-existent. There's the hairdresser kneeling beside your bed with a small bronze comb, waiting for your nod. There's the body servant, whose job is to oil your skin with a blend of almond and sesame oil until it gleams. And somewhere in the corner, a quiet scribe writes down your first words of the day, not for poetry, but for record-keeping, in case they ever become politically significant. The strange part, they're not just here to serve you, they're here to watch you. Anything you do, lingering over a piece of fruit, pacing near the window, even sighing too loudly, will make its way up the palace gossip chain before midday. By evening, your high priests, your generals, and probably your rival cousins will know that you seemed troubled at breakfast. Quirky tidbit. Some attendants were so indispensable that they were buried in miniature tombs near their ruler, ensuring they could serve the pharaoh in the afterlife, whether they volunteered for this honor or not. Well, historians still argue whether such burials were a reward or a very polite execution. A servant kneels to adjust the hem of your linen kilt before you step into the corridor. Another slips a thin gold chain around your wrist. More than jewelry, it's a subtle status tag, proof to anyone you pass that you are under official guard and protection. Outside, the palace corridors feel alive with the shuffle of sandals. Two guards flank you, spears angled outwards, scanning for threats you're not even supposed to think about. At the end of the hall, a new pair takes their place, and the first two fall back to the shadows. This constant changing of the guard looks seamless, but you've noticed how they watch each other too, because a royal guard's loyalty is measured daily. And then there are the personal shadows. These aren't guards or servants, but companions. People whose job is simply to be with you, to keep you talking, laughing, or focused on harmless subjects. Their smiles are warm, but you can't forget they're also trained to report subtle shifts in your mood to palace overseers. It's like having friends who are also your diary, except the diary leaks. Sometimes when the air is heavy and you feel the weight of all those eyes, you imagine slipping out to the streets dressed as a commoner. Historians still debate whether the tales of pharaohs doing this are real or just palace myth, but the idea of anonymity feels almost intoxicating. You reach the balcony. The Nile glitters below, and for a moment, the breeze almost tricks you into thinking you're alone. But then, in the reflection on the polished stone rail, you catch sight of a servant's silhouette, still there, always there. One of the younger attendants steps forward with a small, flat dish. On it rests a delicate blue lotus blossom, its petals just starting to open in the sun. You accept it, knowing it's both a gesture of beauty and a quiet reminder. The palace sees all. The palace remembers all. You breathe in its scent anyway. After all, you might as well enjoy the small luxuries, even if they come with eyes attached. The Nile isn't just a river, it's your lifeline, your stage, and sometimes your escape. From the balcony, you can see its wide, shimmering ribbon curling through the desert, feeding both fields and cities. But today, you'll be closer. You descend the palace steps to a private dock where a royal barge waits, its prow carved into the head of a rearing cobra. Servants bustle to arrange silk cushions and shade canopies, while musicians with sistrums prepare to fill the air with that soft metallic jingle. Mainstream historical fact. The pharaoh's connection to the Nile was central to their image as a divine provider. Annual ceremonies like the opening of the inundation celebrated the river's flooding, which brought fertile soil to the farmlands. Without the Nile, Egypt's wealth and survival would have been impossible. The barge glides away from the dock, its oars moving in perfect unison. The morning air smells of wet reeds and silt. Fishermen bow their heads as you pass, their reed boats bobbing low in the water. You wave, not because you need to, but because it makes you seem more godlike, approachable. Quirky tidbit. Some pharaohs kept pet hippos and crocodiles in enclosed pools, both as symbols of power and, believe it or not, good luck charms. You've never been fond of the hippos. They may look sleepy, but you've seen one snap a log in half like it was a breadstick. The water reflects the clouds in broken shards. You let your fingers trail through it for a moment, feeling the cool rush. That's when you spot it, a flash of movement just under the surface. A crocodile, big enough to knock over a smaller boat, slips silently past. The guards tense, but you just watch, knowing it won't attack your barge. Probably. Historians still argue whether pharaohs themselves truly feared the river's dangers or considered themselves untouchable. In truth, you've learned to respect them, because divinity might protect your soul, but it doesn't do much against crocodile teeth. The musicians switch to a slower rhythm, and you recline on the cushions. For a brief moment, it almost feels peaceful. Then, you notice one of the companions from the palace seated just behind you, pretending to enjoy the view. Even out here, miles from the marble corridors, the watchers remain. The boat pulls up beside a reed island, one of your favorite secret spots. It's nothing more than a tangle of papyrus and wildflowers, but here, the air feels free. You step onto the spongy ground, attendants fanning out in a protective ring. One of the servants brings out a tray, honey cakes, dates, and chilled beer in a clay jar wrapped with wet cloth to keep it cool. You sit cross-legged, biting into the sticky sweetness, the taste mixing with the smell of sun-warmed plants. And yet, even here, serenity is a performance. Your attendants watch for any sign, any sigh, any pause that they can interpret for the palace gossip mill. You've learned to smile without meaning it, to appear relaxed even when your thoughts are elsewhere. As you prepare to leave, you look once more at the river's broad surface. Beneath it, you know, lies a labyrinth of unseen currents, hiding both beauty and danger, not unlike the palace itself. Back in the palace, the air is thick with incense, and somewhere in the labyrinth of corridors, a harp is playing. But you're not headed to the throne room or the banquet hall. You're making your way to the chambers of the royal physicians. The walls here are painted with symbols of the gods of healing. Sekhmet with her lioness face, Thoth with the head of an ibis, watching as you pass. Inside, shelves overflow with clay jars, bundles of dried plants, and small alabaster pots sealed with wax. The smell is part herbal, part metallic, part mysterious. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian physicians were famed for blending medicine with magic. They kept detailed medical papyri, lists of remedies for everything from toothaches to childbirth complications. Many of their treatments were surprisingly effective, using ingredients like honey for its antibacterial properties. The chief physician greets you with a bow and an unreadable smile. He carries a small carved box, and when he opens it, you see rows of tiny vials filled with powders, oils, and crushed petals. He explains each in that sing-song cadence healers use when they don't want you to question too much. Quirky tidbit. Some love charms involved writing the name of your desired partner on a scrap of papyrus, soaking it in wine, and then drinking it, on the theory that consuming the name would bind their heart to yours. You've been offered such charms more than once, though whether they work or just taste like wet ink is another matter. You try one of the revitalizing potions. It's sweet at first, then bitter, with a faint peppery burn at the back of your throat. You feel not exactly different, but the physician assures you it will restore the fire of the gods in your veins. Historians still argue whether such potions truly had physical effects or whether they worked mainly because everyone believed they would. In a smaller adjoining room, you find a more private assortment of items. Carved ivory amulets shaped like lotus flowers, small copper mirrors polished to a glow, and necklaces strung with beads said to attract the gaze of love. It's easy to forget that in this place, health isn't just about living, it's about living beautifully. A servant slips in, carrying a folded cloth. Inside are fresh petals from the palace gardens, still damp with morning dew. These will be ground into a paste with myrrh to make your skin glow under torchlight. You think of the last banquet, the flicker of flames catching the gold dust brushed along your cheekbones, and how every pair of eyes turned toward you at once. But the visit is not entirely pleasant. The physician discreetly examines a rash on your arm, a souvenir perhaps from one of your more adventurous evenings. He prescribes a salve and warns you not to let the court gossip see it. Even a god king is not immune to whispers. Before you leave, he hands you a tiny pouch. Inside is a piece of meteoric iron, cool and heavy in your palm. Carry this near your heart, he says, and your passions will never cool. Whether it's science, magic, or pure theater, you decide to keep it anyway. After all, in your position, every charm counts. The streets beyond the palace walls hum with a different kind of life. You slip into the shadows of a colonnade, half hidden by a linen hood, and listen. The people are speaking about you again, your name woven into every casual market exchange, as if the Pharaoh's presence sits at every stall alongside the baskets of figs and pyramids of pomegranates. A woman selling bread leans over to her neighbor and murmurs something that makes them both laugh. You catch only fragments, words about too much wine, and gods who watch everything. Their tone isn't venomous, but it's sharp enough to cut through the warm afternoon air. Mainstream historical fact: pharaohs were viewed as living gods, but that divinity didn't shield them from public opinion. Ancient Egyptian towns thrived on gossip, passed between neighbors in the same way they traded fish or grain. Praise and criticism traveled just as quickly. You wander past a group of fishermen untangling their nets. They lower their voices when you draw near, but one still mutters about taxes and how the palace feasts grow while his catches shrink. The Nile glitters behind him, patient and indifferent. Quirky tidbit: some households kept tiny clay figurines shaped like their ruler, not for worship, but as, let's say, conversational props. People whispered to them, joked at them, sometimes even scolded them when they thought no one was listening. In a way, you're everywhere, even where you'd rather not be. Later, at a hidden tavern near the river's edge, you overhear two traveling merchants. One tells an elaborate tale about the pharaoh's harem, your harem, as if he had been there himself. His details are absurd. Dancers wearing nothing but silver chains, a fountain of spiced wine, love poems etched into the walls. The other man nods eagerly, eyes wide, swallowing every word. Historians still argue whether such rumors ever had kernels of truth, or if they were pure fantasy born of envy and distance. You smile to yourself. Sometimes the truth is stranger, and sometimes it's much duller than what the people imagine. But their whispers are a double-edged sword. Adoration can become resentment in the space of a bad harvest, and every story told in your favor has its mirror in a darker tale. Back in the palace that night, the music and laughter can't quite drown out the memory of those market voices. You think of the bread seller's smirk, the fisherman's grumble, the merchant's wild embellishments. In the echoing corridors, you wonder, not for the first time, if you've become more myth than flesh to the people you rule. The palace wakes before the sun, and so do you. Even the air feels half asleep, warm but not yet heavy, carrying the faint tang of last night's incense. You step barefoot across cool limestone tiles, your shadow stretching long and thin in the lamplight. Today is not a day for rest. It's a day for the ritual of appearances, the subtle theater that keeps your divine image intact. Servants bring in the ceremonial coal, ground fresh from galena and mixed with oils so smooth it glides onto your eyelids like a dark whisper. They paint not only your eyes but your role, guardian of order, living god, untouchable. Mainstream historical fact: heavy eye makeup in ancient Egypt wasn't purely cosmetic. It also helped protect against the sun's glare and warded off infections. But in your case, every stroke is about more than health. It's a frame for the performance. You're draped in gold-threaded linen so fine it clings like a second skin. A pectoral of lapis lazuli and turquoise rests on your chest, heavy enough to remind you of the crown you'll soon wear. The workers who made it never spoke to you directly. They weren't allowed, but they wove their craftsmanship into every bead, their quiet fingerprints hidden in its perfection. Quirky tidbit: some courtiers insist on dabbing perfume on the soles of your feet before major appearances. They claim it helps walk in the scent of the gods, though really it just means the audience gets a faint whiff of lotus with every step you take. Outside, the palace courtyard fills with officials, foreign envoys, and local nobles. Their eyes follow you, searching for cracks in the divine facade. You keep your chin high, your stride unhurried. You don't greet them as equals, only with the faintest nods, as if your attention were a gift they might not deserve. Historians still argue whether this aloofness was genuine belief in Pharaoh's divinity or a calculated act to maintain power. You know the truth. It's both. The distance keeps them guessing, and guessing keeps them loyal, or at least compliant. Later, back inside, you allow the mask to slip. You loosen the gold collar, rub at the marks it left on your skin, stretch your feet now free of perfumed oil. Alone, you're just a person in a room too big for comfort, wondering if anyone in the courtyard saw through the gleam and into the bones beneath. Night in the palace is never truly dark. Even with the torches dimmed, there's always a low orange glow leaking through latticework screens, carrying the smell of tallow and cedar. You move through it like someone in a dream, bare feet silent, gold ankle chains whispering with each step. You head toward the private wing where the rules soften and the masks slip. Here, the air is thick with perfume, and silk curtains sway gently in the night breeze. This is the harem, though the word barely contains the complexity of what it means in your world. Mainstream historical fact: royal harems in Egypt weren't just for pleasure. They were also political hubs, filled with wives and concubines who came from influential families, sometimes even foreign princesses sent to cement alliances. They brought their own languages, customs, and, let's be honest, occasional drama. You pass a group of women playing senet, the board pieces clacking softly. Others recline on cushions, weaving tiny gold beads into each other's hair. A harpist plucks a melody so languid it feels like your heartbeat is slowing to match. The room is warm but not stifling, thanks to a servant fanning air through a shallow bowl of cool water. Quirky tidbit: some members of the harem keep trained monkeys as companions. They're dressed in miniature linen tunics and have been known to steal figs or pull hairpins from elaborate braids, mischief tolerated only because it makes the pharaoh laugh. Historians still argue whether pharaohs maintained deep personal bonds here or kept everyone at arm's length as part of political strategy. You know from experience that both happen. One moment it's a game of careful distance, the next you're sharing a whispered joke over a spilled cup of wine. As the night deepens, stories rise like smoke, tales of jealous feuds, of love letters slipped into the wrong hands, of secret alliances that could shift power in a single evening. You take it all in, not as entertainment, but as part of the delicate machinery you operate every day. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you know, just like the courtiers in the sunlit courtyard, everyone here is watching you too. The scent hits you before the sound, the faint resinous bite of Kai-Fi incense curling through the palace corridors. It's the royal bedchamber being prepared, and the ritual is as intricate as anything performed in a temple. Servants pad in and out, adjusting lamps, sprinkling the floor with petals, laying out linen so fine it almost disappears in the torchlight. You slip inside and feel the shift. The space is quieter than the harem, more controlled, almost theatrical. Every pillow is positioned with geometric precision, every vessel of scented oil gleaming like liquid amber. The air has that slow, heavy quality, the kind that makes your thoughts turn inward. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptian royalty believed that intimacy was not just personal, it was cosmic. The pharaoh's body symbolized the living Horus, and unions in the royal bed could be framed as acts that renewed the world's balance. Even the timing might be chosen to align with celestial events. Quirky tidbit: the pillows here aren't soft in the way you expect. Many are actually carved headrests, smooth curves of alabaster or wood, believed to protect against evil spirits while you slept. Comfort takes second place to cosmic security, apparently. Historians still argue whether these nightly rituals were spontaneous or carefully scripted. Some accounts suggest genuine passion. Others paint them as ceremonial obligations, with every movement documented and preserved in the palace's unspoken memory. You can almost imagine a scribe hiding behind a screen, stylus poised, recording every sigh for posterity. You notice a bowl of figs and honey resting on a low table. The sweetness is for more than hunger. It's meant to flavor the night, to linger in the mouth like a half-remembered dream. A delicate gold pitcher of pomegranate wine sits beside it, and you wonder whether it's for courage, pleasure, or simply tradition. Outside, the Nile glimmers in the moonlight, silent and watchful. You can't shake the thought that even the river knows what happens here feeds into the myths people will tell centuries from now. And you, breathing in the smoke and sweetness, are both a player and an audience in this slow, strange performance. You step out into the pre-dawn courtyard, blinking at the pale blue light bleeding over the horizon. The air is cooler now, carrying that faint mineral scent of the river mixed with the earthy tang of lotus ponds. Servants move like shadows, folding up the night's silks, gathering dishes and vessels as if erasing the traces of whatever played out behind closed doors. Somewhere deep inside the palace, the pharaoh stirs from sleep, and with that awakening comes an entire apparatus of morning rituals. Mainstream historical fact: pharaohs often began their day with purification rites. These weren't quick splashes of water, but elaborate sequences, water poured over the body from sacred vessels, scented oils rubbed into the skin, hair combed with ivory teeth, eyes painted with kohl, not just for beauty, but to ward off infection and malevolent spirits. Quirky tidbit: not all the oils were floral or pleasant. Some recipes involved fat rendered from animals mixed with herbs to keep the skin supple. Imagine starting your day with a massage that smells vaguely like last night's dinner. Historians still argue whether the pharaoh's mornings were private or semi-public. Some depictions suggest that favored courtiers, priests, and even foreign dignitaries might witness the process, not for pleasure, but as a display of vitality and divine favor. You picture the awkward small talk. "Yes, welcome to Egypt. Please stand by while our god king moisturizes." The courtyard bustles as animals are led to the kitchens, their hooves tapping softly against stone. Musicians begin to pluck at lyres in the distance, their melodies drifting over the palace walls. The sound is faint, but it feels intentional. Music to smooth the mind into the day ahead. You notice the harem quarters' lattice windows still shuttered, holding in the remnants of perfume and candle smoke. Beyond them lies a world few will ever see, one that reshapes itself nightly to suit the pharaoh's whims. And as the sun pushes higher, gilding the edges of the palace, you realize these rituals, both intimate and public, are the scaffolding that holds up the illusion of godhood. The sun climbs higher now, its light striking the limestone walls until they seem to glow from within. You walk along a shaded colonnade where painted scenes of the pharaoh's victories run in endless rows. Lions struck mid-leap, enemies kneeling in surrender, the god-king towering above them all. The artistry is breathtaking, but you can't help noticing the lack of realism. Every battle looks neat, every victory total. Mainstream historical fact: pharaohs controlled the narrative of their reign through temple inscriptions and monuments, often exaggerating victories or omitting defeats entirely. Even disasters, plagues, uprisings, bad harvests, were reframed as cosmic tests that the ruler overcame with divine wisdom. Quirky tidbit: in some reliefs, conquered enemies are shown in bizarrely uniform poses, almost like they were stenciled in. You wonder if the artisans had a generic enemy template to save time. After all, carving granite isn't exactly a quick job. Historians still argue whether the pharaoh's propaganda was meant to fool the people or simply to remind them of the ideal order. Maybe nobody believed the king personally wrestled crocodiles, but they appreciated the image of a ruler so mighty that he could. You imagine a modern equivalent: a president commissioning an official portrait of themselves bench-pressing a pickup truck. As you stroll, A group of scribes passes by, reed pens tucked behind their ears, papyrus rolls under their arms. They nod slightly in your direction, their eyes darting to see if you'll acknowledge them. In this society, writing is power. Control the records, and you control the future. The Pharaoh's scribes are the unseen architects of his legend, deciding which days go down in history and which vanish into silence. Beyond the columns, you catch a glimpse of the temple forecourt where priests prepare offerings. The air is thick with incense, the smoke curling upward like ghostly fingers. Somewhere in that haze, the truth of the Pharaoh's life is being polished and painted for public consumption. Another perfect day in the reign of a perfect king. The incense haze thins as you move toward a quieter corner of the temple complex where few visitors are allowed. Here the walls shift from public grandeur to something far more private. Delicate paintings of the royal household, scenes not meant for the masses. You pause before one panel showing the pharaoh with his children, each child in miniature proportions, their heads crowned with small versions of royal headdresses. They look serene, but you know serenity in a palace is often an illusion. Mainstream historical fact: pharaohs had large families, sometimes dozens of children, born to queens, secondary wives, and favored concubines. These offspring were more than heirs. They were political tools, married off to secure alliances or, in some cases, kept close to strengthen claims to the throne. Quirky tidbit: some royal children had their heads shaped deliberately in infancy, bound to produce elongated skulls that were considered beautiful and divine. Imagine a toddler with a crown perched on a head shaped like a melon, tottering around the palace corridors while being fanned by servants. Historians still argue whether these children lived pampered or pressured lives. The evidence hints at both. Lavish toys made of gold and ivory have been found in tombs, alongside records of rigid training in court etiquette and religious duties. You picture a young prince learning to recite hymns perfectly before breakfast, while outside the palace walls, real children are skipping stones in the Nile. One fresco shows the royal nursery, attendants grinding exotic herbs, amulets hanging above cradles to ward off illness, tiny sandals laid out in neat rows. The pharaoh himself rarely appeared here in reality, but in art, he is always present, smiling benevolently as if bedtime stories were a part of his daily schedule. You step away from the painted walls and into a small garden enclosed by high stone walls. The air is cooler here, and you hear the soft splash of a fountain, likely one of the few places where the children could play without the risk of public eyes. It feels like a sanctuary, yet every doorway is guarded. Privacy here is never truly private. You drift from the garden into a narrow corridor lined with storage rooms, their heavy doors propped open. Inside, you see shelves upon shelves of sealed jars, each marked with symbols you can't quite decode. A servant glances up from stacking baskets of dried figs and salted fish, the staples of palace life. Here's where you begin to notice another side of the royal household. One not painted in gold or wrapped in linen, but measured in food and supplies. Mainstream historical fact: Egyptian palaces had their own internal economies, storing months, sometimes years' worth of goods. Grain silos, meat lockers cooled with dampened reed mats, and amphorae filled with imported wine were all under strict inventory. Royal feasts could involve hundreds of guests, and nothing, not even the wine, was allowed to run out. Quirky tidbit: some jars contain not food, but cosmetics, thick black coal paste, perfumed oils, and powdered malachite, because beauty maintenance was considered almost as vital as bread. In fact, jars of cosmetics were stored alongside grain as if eyeliner and loaves of bread were equally essential for survival. Historians still argue whether the abundance in these stores was genuinely for the pharaoh's household or more a public display of control over wealth. It's one thing to stock up for a rainy day. It's another to make sure everyone knows you could throw a feast tomorrow that would last a week. You imagine a young kitchen servant tasked with polishing gold platters that might only be used twice a year. Somewhere else, a scribe carefully notes each jar leaving the storeroom, perhaps sighing when the pharaoh requests yet another banquet to impress foreign dignitaries. The air is thick here, not with the scent of incense, but with preserved spices, pickled fish, and the faint sharpness of wine that's been sealed for too long. Even without the gilded walls, you feel the weight of power in these storerooms. In the palace, control over food is control over people, and the pharaoh's household had more than enough to ensure loyalty. You step back into the corridor, and the hum of daily palace life returns. Somewhere ahead, music drifts in again, pulling you toward what feels like the heart of the royal domain. The music grows louder as you pass through an archway into the grand banquet hall. The ceiling soars above you, painted with constellations and blue lotus blooms. Columns rise like palm trunks, their capitals bursting into green fronds. A long table stretches the length of the hall, already laid with bronze and gold vessels, each gleaming under the flicker of oil lamps. This is not a modest dinner. This is theater. Mainstream historical fact: banquets in the pharaoh's court were as much political tools as they were feasts. Foreign envoys were seated according to status, meals were served in careful order, and even the music was chosen to flatter or intimidate. In some cases, the pharaoh himself might not eat much at all, but would be the centerpiece, a living emblem of divine abundance. Quirky tidbit: guests were often given lotus flowers to sniff, not just for fragrance, but because they believed the scent had mildly intoxicating effects. Imagine the ancient version of a party favor, except instead of a gift bag, you got a flower that made you feel just a little floaty. Historians still argue whether these banquets truly reflected everyday luxury for the pharaoh, or if they were overblown spectacles designed purely for show. After all, a ruler might want his foreign guests to believe he dined like this every night, even if he usually preferred something as simple as bread and beer in private chambers. Servants glide between guests, pouring beer from tall jars and setting down roasted duck, honey cakes, and figs stuffed with almonds. The music shifts to a slower rhythm, harp strings vibrating softly under nimble fingers. You notice the dancers again, this time masked, their movements deliberate, telling silent stories through gestures. As you watch, it's impossible not to feel the contrast. Beyond these walls, farmers are bending over their fields in the fading light. In here, cups overflow and laughter echoes. The pharaoh sits at the head, leaning slightly back, eyes half-lidded, as though every motion around him is an extension of his will. The night stretches long, but even the most decadent feasts eventually fade. The lamps burn lower, the music dims, and guests begin to leave. And so your journey through the palace life of the pharaoh comes to its quiet end. You let the last notes of the harp dissolve into the air, the sound curling away like smoke into the rafters. The torches along the wall flicker, then soften, and the scent of lotus lingers faintly, mingling with the richer smells of roasted meats and honeyed wine. Around you, the hall is emptying. First the most important guests, then the lesser, until only a few servants remain to clear the remains of the feast. You walk slowly back through the palace, your footsteps muffled by woven reed mats. The corridors that seemed alive with sound and movement before now rest in near silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of a curtain shifting in the night breeze. The air is cooler here, softer, as though the entire building is breathing in and out with you. You pass by the gardens one last time. The moonlight paints the ponds silver, and the papyrus fronds sway in slow rhythm. A frog croaks somewhere in the shadows, and the sound feels almost like a lullaby. The world beyond these palace walls seems very far away now. You've seen the opulence and the strangeness, the rituals and the secrets, the public grandeur and the private oddities of a life meant to inspire awe. You return to the edge of the palace grounds, where the night stretches open before you. The stars above are the same ones painted on the banquet hall's ceiling, only here they glitter cold and clear. You take one last breath of the warm, fragrant air. It's easy to imagine the palace slipping back into dreams the moment you turn away, its gilded corridors vanishing into the dark, leaving you with only the echo of music and the memory of gold. Sweet dreams.